Do you ever wonder when the time comes what your last words might be? What words do you want to express in your last moments of your life to be remembered by? I was reflecting on this recently, especially as I heard the news of Pope Benedict's passing last week. The nurse at his bedside said that before passing away, the Pope Emeritus said in a soft but clear voice, "Lord, I love you." Simple yet all-encompassing, isn't it? Lord, I love you. In fact, that's what this whole feast day is about. The entire Christmas season, which ends today with the feast of the Epiphany, is all about love. Love appears among us. Love himself comes down as a little baby. Love draws close to us, becomes human to bridge the gap sin had created, to pull us in his embrace. Some years ago, I learned about a set of twins, Dylan and Denoyle, who were born prematurely at 25 weeks in Bolton, England. And Dylan ended up beginning to thrive, even though he's premature, and was transferred to a hospital 60 miles away, whereas Denoyle, his brother, was put on a ventilator as he needed 100% of oxygen to keep him alive. And after 14 weeks, the prognosis was not good. It seemed like Denoyle would not be able to survive, so their parents brought Dylan and placed him in the same incubator as his brother to say his last goodbye. In the process, little Dylan instinctively placed his arms around his dying brother, and with Dylan by his side, his condition began to improve, and within 2 days, Denoyle was off the ventilator completely. His mom said it was really a miracle. Dylan saved his brother's life with a cuddle with an embrace. It showed all of us that they should never have been separated. And I think sometimes, like Denoyle, we ourselves don't realize that we're not functioning at 100% oxygen when we're separated from Jesus Christ. We need the closeness of this little baby, and whenever we try to live our lives apart from him, we will always falter. We will always strain for air and the will to survive. This was at the heart of the Magi's search for Jesus. They knew that they could not live far from him. So this is why Jesus did not come as an intimidating God on the clouds with thunder and lightning and legions of angels. He came as a child so that all who truly search for him may not be afraid to approach a small baby and be embraced by him. Now, we are all aware of the events of Christmas, right? But today's feast is a little bit different because it focuses less on the actual birth of Jesus and more on the reactions of certain people to his birth. So looking at the scene, it's easy to conclude, okay, so on one sense, we have Herod, bad response. We have the chief priests and scribes, they also had a bad response. And the Magi, they had a good response. After all, look at Herod, right? His reaction was one of hatred. He is afraid of Jesus. He sees Jesus as a threat to his established power. He is a Jewish king, the very faith that was waiting for the Messiah, a king who said he adheres to the faith, yet he is willing to sacrifice babies, issuing a decree for the slaughter of innocents, sacrifice at his altar of power. Then there's the chief priests and the scribes, the religious leaders of the day. They possess the knowledge of where the Messiah would be born, yet they remain indifferent. They do nothing to seek or find him. They are simply content with the religious head knowledge, but they fail to live it out and to worship him. And sometimes don't we do the same? At times, like Herod, have we seen Jesus as a threat to our life of comfortability? Rather than embracing the good news of Jesus' birth, of love coming into the world with joy, we automatically reject and continue to pursue our pathway of sin. And sometimes we may say, oh man, the church is so out of touch. Like the priest doesn't know what he's talking about. They got to get with the times. And we have things like talking about marriage, about sexuality, about all these tough things. And I only bring this up because those are like the hot button issues, or that faith isn't like, relevant, that it's all about science, not knowing that it's together. And sometimes we automatically think when we receive those things, nope, I'm going to push you away. I want to stick with my own ideas rather than listening to the voice of truth and to the church. And we do the same thing like Herod. Or we're like the scribes that say, you know what? I know God wants me to live a life of virtue. I went through the Bible in a year podcast with Father Mike Schmitz. I'm starting the catechism in a year. I go to church pretty regularly, and this is all good. But we must be truly careful of using head knowledge as a spiritual insurance. Like, just in case, Lord, right? You did see me on the 5th pew on the right every Sunday. Sorry to all those in the 5th pew right now. I'm not picking on you. But that's why the reason and the example of the Magi, who in following the star, they pursued the universal longing of their heart, refusing to be led astray until they came to Jerusalem. They weren't distracted by the counsel of Herod, by the lies of this world that often asks us to betray Jesus and our faith for earthly honor. They weren't even discouraged by the behavior of the supposed religious people. How many times have we heard people say, I don't want to come to the church because of the parishioners there, or the priest, or the pope, or whatever? No, their eyes always remain focused on the star leading them to Christ. That's why they were there, and they bent their knees and worshiped him. Today we live in such a divided world. We see much hatred and indifference in society. Hatred of Herod and the indifference of the scribes. And part of the reason such reactions exist is because, like Herod and the scribes, we fail to see Jesus in our midst and fail to worship him as God. For when we recognize Jesus is with us and we truly worship him as God, our lives are transformed. You know, Matthew Kelly, in his book Holy Moments, tells of the story of a monastery of joyful monks. And in fact, people came far and wide to this community because they were so attracted by the example and virtuous living of these monks. However, as time passed on, crankiness, impatience, jealousy crept in, and the monks themselves, they closed their heart to God and to each other. And soon the visitors started to notice the change in the community, such that they stopped coming there altogether and visiting. And so the abbot knew that something had to be done, so he sought the advice of this holy hermit. And upon arrival, the hermit first took the abbot to a lake. And after passing some time in silence until the sun reflected perfectly over the still water of the lake like a golden disk, the hermit said, "Notice how the still lake reflects the sun perfectly. God is the sun, you are the lake. And when your soul is still and clear, you reflect the truth, beauty, and goodness of God to everyone you encounter. So take that time for stillness and prayer so that you can reflect God." Then the abbot said, "Okay, that's fine for me, but what about my monastery? What wisdom do you have for my hermits? How do we revitalize the community? How do we best serve the visitors?" And the hermit was quiet for a moment, and he said 3 questions, but 1 answer. "Go back and tell your brothers that the Messiah is among you." So the abbot returns, tells his brother monks what the hermit said, and all the monks begin wondering, who is the Messiah among them? So since they don't know, they start to treat every one of them with kindness, showing compassion, forgiving one another for their faults. And a total transformation occurs such that when visitors start to return, one of the visitors asks the abbot, "How did this change occur?" And he simply says, "We started living as if Jesus were among us and began treating every person that we meet like the second coming of Jesus in disguise." You see, once we encounter God and our hearts are moved to worship him like the Magi, no longer will we see Jesus as a threat or be indifferent to him. The Magi departed to their country by a different route, and this wasn't simply a change of the pathways. There was also a change of the heart, such that they couldn't go back to their old ways. At this Mass, we too may we leave transformed by this encounter with love himself. May we encounter Jesus and treat each person like Christ in disguise, such that every action, word, and thought that we make may speak ever so silently the sentiment, "Lord, I love you till our last breath.